Hi, this is Kevin at Novel to You. We're reading Taemane. This is episode 5, a continuation of chapter 5. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. It was the last cart of the day, and several shifts of men had already gone up the elevator from the ever-deepening shaft. The elevator was at the end of the shaft, facing the open pit floor, and would lift miners up the bank of the pit to the level surface. As he raced the cart toward the tip area, Alex drove with all the power in his legs past the haggard line of miners. It was a show he often put on at the end of the day to try to give a bit of a lift to the exhausted men. They had all been underground for 8 hours, and soon they could relax. A final thrust, and the cart was tipped with a cheer from the watching group. Alex returned to them and joked with some of the others as they waited for the lift to return from the surface. He leaned back against the wall to catch his breath and listened to the mixture of Xhosa and Bantu with a splattering of English. The English related to the upcoming football match, which occurred every third week during the shift changes. It was old man Ostenstadt's idea. He was a football fanatic and still watched the games when he could. His refereeing days had stopped with his chest problems, and there seemed to be fewer arguments because of his dodgy decisions. In fact, there was better football because he was no longer involved. Alex gazed blankly across the mine shaft, happy to be going up on this of all days. A man near the back dropped his helmet and then picked it up. Amazingly, he dropped it again, only this time he lingered near the wall and dug with his toe at the foot of a beam. He straightened and then rested his foot on the wall behind. Alex, exhausted from a hard day, watched through half-sleepy eyes as something in the man's toes transferred to his hand. In an instant his hand flashed up to put his helmet on, and a tiny dirt rock was pushed into the man's ear as he replaced his helmet. Alex was stunned by what he had just witnessed and turned away so as not to seem suspicious. Becoming aware of his surroundings, he realized it was always this same group of men who traveled up last. He scanned the other men. Another man, well known as he had only one eye and was a relatively recent arrival, washed his glass eye in his mouth. He slipped it back in place, but appeared to fiddle with it as though something else went in behind it. The swiftness of the hand action amazed Alex. A patch that the man wore when he was down in the mine was replaced, and he carried on as if nothing had happened. The lift arrived, and the men jostled into the cramped 8-foot square box. The winch whirred, and the slack was taken up in the cable, and then they began the ascent to the ground level. In the haze of early evening light cast across the open pit, Alex struggled to locate the men he had seen earlier. The smell of male sweat and grime was overpowering. He stared into the setting sun, piercing the back of the elevator cage. At the top, when the crowd of miners left the elevator to join the others, already waiting the entrance, Alex lost the two men among the bustling crowd of jostling, joking men. Alex stepped onto a nearby drum and spotted the men walking off to the toilets. Body searches for stolen diamonds were strict and involved examinations of nose, mouth, hands, and feet. It was standard. Other mines had routine rectal examinations as well, but that was considered more of a random examination at the Ostenstadt mine. Skin was always closely examined, as false flaps were often receptacles for diamonds. Alex had heard numerous stories from the miners about other mines where special folds were cut into armpits, behind knees, even into the pubic area. The punishment for theft or attempted theft was severe. It was one thing that old man Ostenstadt was intolerant of. At most mines, a public lashing was held before the police were called and a jail sentence was administered. Those men who were convicted disappeared. As a result, there was a general sense of honesty around the mine. The sense of fairness and honesty at the Ostenstadt mine, more than any other mine, was reflected by the wages, which were 15% higher, with much better camp conditions. The sense of honesty and respect for the old family was paramount, or at least that was what Alex thought, until now. The two men were joined by two others, and the group ambled toward the toilet. Alex followed them as they entered the wash house. They each grabbed a cup of water to wash themselves and crouched over the foul, open pit. Alex stood and urinated beside them. He watched, and though they seemed to defecate, they definitely didn't. They washed themselves and strolled nonchalantly from the toilets. Alex stood aside, amazed at their confidence. They waved to the guard at the entrance and wandered toward the main gate that led toward the worker compound. The Taemane mine had always worked on a rotating shift basis, with 2 teams of men being hired every 3 weeks. They stayed in the compound away from their families. The men saw their families, often living in villages nearby, on the long changeover weekend. The mine worked on 2 shifts from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. The 2-hour overlap at noon was key to maintaining equipment, as well as the time for the slurry to catch up. Carl had employed this system because it reduced equipment breakdowns. The mining itself continued 14 hours a day for 18 days straight. Everyone signed on for the next 3-week shift and enjoyed the long weekend with their families. Such was the Taemane reputation that there was never a shortage of people hoping to get on the payroll. Most men would stay for half a dozen shift rotations before taking a 3-week break and then returning, hoping to get their position back. But all 4 of these men had arrived within the last 2 or 3 shift changes. Alex watched the 4 men trail behind all the other workers as the tangle of bodies made their way back to the small worker compound. There was a slight bend in the road, bordered by a bluff and a few outrock croppings. The men appeared to pause, glance back, and then dart off the road behind the bluff. Alex, knowing the area well from his youth, dashed around the main house and saw them slip through the perimeter fencing on the far side. The fencing had been cut halfway up, all along the line of the post, and it had never been noticed. He raced along the rough rock outcropping and found a vantage point 200 yards away. He crouched down behind some prickly brush and watched the men huddle together in a hollowed, sunken area of scrub about 100 yards from the fence. Alex watched as one eye popped the glass eye out and the small coarse rock behind it. He then poured water all over his face. They were all relaxed and convinced that no one suspected them. One eye helped another man extract a rock from his ear. He seemed to pick at it with a long straw, and then he sucked it out. The 2 other men, having defecated on a wooden plank, sifted through their stool for the diamond that they had shoved up their ass. They washed the diamonds off with a small canteen and then passed them to one eye. 2 of the men walked off to a nearby anthill. The vertical mud cylinder was a massive structure, about 1 foot in diameter and 4 foot high. It teemed with an ever-shimmering flood of ants. The ants, however, only swarmed up about 3/4 of the way up the mound, leaving the anthill to appear to have a cloudy white top. An anthill, once cut, will never be re-inhabited by the ants above the cut line. It was an ideal stash for the diamonds. 2 of the men slid the top off and leaned it to one side. One reached in and pulled out a small pouch. He put the diamonds inside and returned the pouch into the anthill cavity, then slid the top of its position before jumping clear of the swarming carpet and brushing the little demons from his legs. The men casually walked back toward the passage in the fence. They were confident the 5-minute deviation had gone completely unnoticed. Alex sat back, considering what he had seen. To even pick a diamond off the ground anywhere was a serious crime in South Africa. To find one loose on a road, however innocent, was an offense that could end up in jail. He was uncertain what to do, but decided it was best to wait and see how many others were involved. He jogged casually back to the mine. Today was not the day for this to be revealed. A few small diamonds were not going to make a difference. He needed to find out how organized the smuggling system was. Mary was in the main kitchen and sang while she cooked. She had long ago accepted the situation with Alex down the mine, and today was in a jolly mood. Her voice rumbled with the freedom of her sighs. Alex approached quietly, glancing from side to side. Though he had privileges as Mary's son, he would rather not confront Claire. Well, at least not today. He leaned around the doorframe and peered into the kitchen. It was a delight to see the mammoth woman sashay her bulk and expertise in a great culinary waltz. She bathed in the aroma of her cooking, the magic of her kitchen realm. She cooked with her heart, and it came through in the flavor of her presentations. She saw Alex peering around the frame and smiled. Her pudgy cheeks, like glistening meatballs, raised up to squinch her eyes. She continued to sing. "Smells good, Mom. Something special?" "Ha! As if you don't know." She looked at him in feigned disbelief. "I've seen you counting the days until Kate comes home this afternoon." He protested, but she held her ladle up. "Don't? How long have you been counting? 3 years? Since her last visit? Well, at least you can count to 1,000, I suppose." She laughed at her little joke, but saw he didn't find it funny. He was very concerned. Nothing had filled his thoughts more. Regardless of all the letters, promises, hopes, and talk of love, he was still a black miner. But Alex was not a man that shied away from doubt, shied away from a challenge. He would present himself proudly in front of her, and if what she said in her letters was true, then he had nothing to be ashamed of and everything to hope for. His mother could see his thoughts. "I know both of you all too well. I have whacked both your backsides, and I'm telling you, you are wasting your time, Alex. She will come back from that finishing school a very different girl than she was when you knew her. Lord, little Kate, she's a woman now. Claire was different when she returned. God knows what poison they fed her. She's a different woman now, Kate." "I know, my little Katie. A woman." The roly-poly cheeks fluttered with emotion. Trying to defend his hopes, he half whispered, "Well, she sounds the same in her letters, Mom." The big woman crossed to him and placed a ham-sized palm up to her big boy's cheek. "A letter from far away is one thing, but a black diamond digger is another, honey. You have been told." "So," she tapped his cheek, "what do you want here anyway? Usually it's just food." "If I was you, I'd be scrubbing myself up. She'll be here in an hour." He was not sure how to begin and did not want to alarm her. "Mama, what's the real penalty for stealing diamonds?" Her eyes bellowed anger and shock. "Taemane? Diamonds? Smuggling here? Smuggling? Taemane?" Mary glanced back to the kitchen entrance, then bustled over to him. She moved her extreme weight at a ferocious pace across the kitchen domain. The rustling of her dress added tension to her scowl. She grabbed his thick, rippled bicep and whipped him out the back door. "You know how bad it is, as well as I do. Are you in some kind of trouble? Oh, Lord, Taemane." No. He rubbed the old woman's shoulder and tried to calm her. "I don't know for sure, but I think I saw some men smuggling in the mine." She turned her bulk directly to him and tapped his chest with the ladle. She peered up at him. "Now you listen here. That's dangerous talk. You could end up dead real quick. These little shiny rocks kill more people than the animals in the bush." She rubbed his arm as tears welled in the dark eyes balanced on her jolly cheeks and threatened to plummet down her smooth brown skin. "You and Katie are the only things in my life. Don't be hurting each other with these impossible dreams, and don't get yourself killed with this kind of smuggling talk." Claire barged through the kitchen door and saw them talking by the back entrance. Alex looked at her and lowered his head. He knew she hated all blacks, but particularly him. Kate once said it was because he was so good-looking, and Claire was jealous of what Alex and Kate had. Seeing the viper in her eyes, he doubted that. She just hated him. "What are you doing here, Alex?" I was just finding out about Kate." "Well, get it out of your head now. She'll have nothing to do with you. And if I see you around here while she's back for her break, I'll have you thrown off, both of you. I'll have you thrown off, you and your mother." She came closer to him and looked up at the muscular man, who was calm, always composed, in front of her. It was something she detested. He refused to be intimidated. "Is that understood, Alex?" "Yes, Miss Clare. I understand your point of view." Hoping to somehow make a difference, he offered a letter to Claire. "If I'll not be seeing her, perhaps you could give her this letter for me?" Claire snatched the letter and read the name of his sister on the cover. The envelope was shockingly clean against his dirty, sweat-stained, brutish body. The writing was even very legible. "Where'd you learn to write?" She held up her hand, stopping him from speaking. She was impressed that to maintain their love he had taken some schooling from somewhere, even though he labored hard down the mine. "Don't tell me! She taught you, didn't she?" The letter intrigued her. She had never received a love letter, if that was what this was. It didn't matter. She wouldn't have his black ass around his sister. "I studied with Father Stanley, too." Alex couldn't tell if she had softened toward him or not. He waited, hoping that she would agree. "I'll look after it. Now, clear off." Alex, with no other option, smiled a thank you, but Claire had already turned away. Alex crossed toward the cottage to shower and clean himself up. There was no point in lingering in Claire's presence. Claire crossed to the stove where Mary was cooking and yanked a cloth from Mary's apron. Grasping a handle on the base of the agar stove, she opened it and tossed the envelope into the fire. "I don't care if he is your son, Mary. You keep him away." She marched from the kitchen. Mary nodded. Little castles of sand were tumbling in the tide of life. She sadly turned to her cooking. She paused and stared at the broth, then drew a slow breath and glanced at the ceiling. "Beth, how did you give birth to that one?" And that's the end of chapter 5. Thanks for joining me. We're reading from Taemane. We'll catch you in the next episode. That's all for now. See you later.